So that made sense to you. Sounded all right.
Yeah, so well, it wasn't so much that, it was just being in the presence of a mind like yours. It's so curious. I enjoyed sharing your space, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Best wishes. I'm going to read some of your books. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for sharing.
One of the early remote viewings that we had that gave us an idea that this could really work well was in the beginning of our program, Patricia Hearst was kidnapped. I guess that would be 1974. And they were so clueless, the police were so clueless that they called us up one day into the operation. I mean, the heiress has kidnapped the daughter of William Randolph Hearst, the publisher of the San Francisco Examiner. It was a very serious issue when an heiress is kidnapped. And they wanted to know if our little program at SRI could help. So Hal Putoff, the other physicist, and Pat Price, the psychic policeman, and I, three of us drove to Berkeley to see if we could help find the heiress. The perfect task for remote viewing. So they had a lot of questions that they wanted to ask us, but Pat Price is a very take-charge kind of guy. And he came in and said, all right, he was a police commissioner of Burbank, so he was very comfortable at the police station, which we were not particularly. I once had, to digress, I once did a remote viewing with a blind psychologist, and the place that Hal went to hide. Because of my bad vision, I never get to go anywhere. It's always Hal who drives off and visits the site. So in this case, he went to the Menlo Park Police Station, and this blind psychologist was sitting with me and said, they're in a place that's very hot. You have to walk up a ramp, and my overwhelming feeling is that this is the kind of place, once you're inside it, you want to get out of it. And we all thought that was a terrific description of a police station. So we were at this Berkeley police station, and Pat Price said, I'd like to see your mug book, which is the big loose leaf binder of all the usual suspects. And they pulled out this big book and laid it on a big oak table, and Price stood over it, spread his legs, put his hands on the table, turned one page after the other, another page, another page. About 10 pages into this book, which has 4 pictures on a page, he put his finger on a guy and said, that's the ringleader. And the name on it was Donald DeVries, alias Sing Q. And a week later, we knew that that was, in fact, the ringleader. And this is a case where there was no possible place that Price could have gotten. Nobody could have given him the answer because nobody knew the answer. So out of a big book with hundreds of pictures, he was able to put his finger right on the face of the guy who was the ringleader of this. See, this is a time when the police department and the newspapers, we knew that it was a kidnap by something called the Symbionese Liberation Army, and the papers were still looking for Symbia on a map of Africa to try and find out who had done this, and the SRI psychics already knew who the perpetrator was. And the police said, well, that's very interesting, but we know who that guy is. He escaped from Soledad prison a year ago, but we haven't heard from him since. Do you know where they've gone? And we had already been to the house that Patricia Hearst was kidnapped from. There were shells rolling around, cartridges, not pistachios, or cartridges rolling around under the bed where the kidnapping had taken place. And Price said they've driven north. They've gone that way. I see a kidnap car. It looked like a white station wagon parked next to a big gas cylinder adjacent to a restaurant near an overpass. And one of the detectives said, well, I know where that is. That's up by Vallejo. I live near there. And he dispatched a cruiser to go up and see if they could find the car. And within 10 minutes, they had found the station wagon on the way to Vallejo near the overpass at the Richardson Bridge. And car was right there in a restaurant parking lot with more cartridges on the floor of the car. So they knew for a fact, because the cartridges matched, they knew that that was the kidnapped car. Of course, nobody was in it anymore, but it really established Price's bona fides as a prodigious psychic. That is, he not only named, it also made them feel confident that Sin-Q, Donald DeVries, was probably the perpetrator because he was able to locate this car with the matching cartridges. Now, I think we would have caught the SLA if there was some cooperation. But you see, the Berkeley detectives and the Alameda County Sheriff's Office and the FBI would not share any information because everybody wanted the great honor of rescuing the heiress. So nobody would tell anybody else what was going on. And of course, the result of that is they escaped. But the next day, Berkeley police said, well, we want to visit one more place up in the Berkeley Hills. Hal went with one person, and I went with one of the detectives. We went driving up into the hills above Berkeley, and high above Berkeley, into the woods. And he said, I want to visit that shack there. Do you know how to handle a gun, Mr. Targ? And I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I own a gun. I own an automatic, so I can handle your gun. So he said, okay, well, cover my back. I'm going to kick in the door. So here we have the great situation. Mr. Magoo has just been handled the guy's service automatic. And I'm in the car covering the back of the officer without kicking in the door of the shack. Well, I decided at that point this is way outside my job description. And I did not do any more of that. And of course, they had already left the area, moved to San Francisco briefly, and then were on their way to LA, where they had the tragic fire and they killed all the people except for Patricia Hearst and a couple of her friends. But it's a case where she could have been rescued if there had been cooperation among the various agencies. Now, the ability that we have really came out of this first decade where great psychics, Ingo Swann and Pat Price, taught us how to be psychic. And I had the interesting opportunity to sit in the dark for a decade helping people learn to be psychic. So it's as though the CIA paid for my spiritual development. It's a very unusual situation. I don't think many people have had that opportunity. And what became clear is that we have this interesting non-local ability. A non-local ability is one that's independent of space and time. So that when we were first doing that, the idea of non-locality was new to us. It wasn't new to physics. The idea of non-local connection had first been talked about by Schrodinger in the 1920s, where he said a consequence of quantum mechanics is that things separated from one another can still be connected. It's the idea that photons that are born together traveling in opposite directions are still connected, so that if you turn a polarizer on the left, it affects the photon on the right. And this has now been done over very long distances. And the idea of non-local connections is not a metaphysical idea. Henry Stapp, who was chairman of the physics department of Berkeley, said non-locality may be the most important development in all of physics. And psychic functioning is non-local, in that the two things I can tell you about ESP that are most amazing. One is that it's no harder to sit here and describe what's happening in China or the Soviet Union than it is to describe the object I've got in my pocket or what's happening across the street. So increasing the distance between the viewer and the thing you're looking at does not degrade psychic functioning. It is no harder to describe a faraway thing than a close-by thing. So my father in New York could call me and say, where's the manuscript? And I could tell him just as easy where the manuscript is as I could tell a lady from Atherton where she lost her tennis bracelet. And I've done both of those things surprisingly well. So increasing the distance does not make it any harder. The other thing that's even more surprising is that describing something in your future, at least up to a few weeks, is no harder than describing something contemporaneous. For example, one of our early tasks that Ingo Swann did, the CIA came to us and said, something's going to happen at these coordinates, whatever they were, next Thursday. So he came on a Monday and said, 3 days from now, we want to know what's going to be happening at these coordinates. And he asked Ingo Swann. And Swann said, this looks really remarkable. Can you get me some colored pencils? So I ran downstairs and got colored pencils and ran back. Whenever Ingo asked for something, you try and do it quickly, otherwise he's going on back to New York. He was not happy in California. Missed the Bowery. So I brought him his pencils, and he said, this is a beautiful pyrotechnic display. Looks like a 4th of July. Beautiful, sir, it's a whole hemisphere of beautiful colored pyrotechnics in the air. That's what I see. That, of course, didn't make any sense, because we didn't think that whatever the CIA wanted us to look at, we didn't think that it was going to be a 4th of July display. But when we showed that to the CIA, they could tell us on the spot what was going on. What they had asked us to describe was a Chinese atomic bomb test. This is 1975. They want us to describe a Chinese atomic bomb test that was going to be carried out 3 days in the future. And based on Swann's description, what the CIA understood is that the atomic bomb test would be carried out and it would fail. Because what Swann had described is what you get when you burn uranium in the air rather than make an explosion. So when you burn uranium, you get this, what they call a pyrophoric display. It burns like mad and makes a pyrotechnic display, but it does not explode. And that would be indicative of a failed atomic bomb test. And indeed, 3 days later, the Chinese did the atomic bomb test and it failed. Now this raises the question, could we have warned them in advance? Can you use information from a precognitive bit of information? Can you use this to get a different outcome? For example, if you have a dream that you're going to crash your car tomorrow and die, do you have to do that? The answer is no, you don't have to. But I don't have a lot of cases of this because it's very hard to show that if you have a precognitive dream and you do something different and then it doesn't happen, maybe it was just an incorrect dream. But precognitive dreams are one of the most common psychic experiences that people have. And once you begin to think about precognition, the great book to read, Jung's Dreams, Memories, and Reflections. And all you have to do is like a magic book. You start to read Jung and write down your dreams. And once you get into dream consciousness, your dreams will just become more vivid, and people who never remember their dreams begin to have precognitive dreams. And you can tell a precognitive dream from an ordinary dream because ordinary dreams are often made up of the previous day's residue, things you're anxious about, things you've seen during the previous day, so forth. For example, if I have a dream about failing an examination that I've not studied for, that would not be a precognitive dream. And I'm happy to tell you that when you get to a certain age, you finally quit having dreams about missing exams. Now, I mean, high school and college must be the most traumatic part of your life. That I've crashed motorcycles, been hit by cars, all kinds of crazy things. I never dream about that. The recurrent dream is I can't find the room where the exam is taken, or I've got an exam and somehow I never took. The exam is coming, but I've never taken the course. This must be, that would not be a precognitive dream. Precognitive dream is often stimulated by something you get the very next morning. Why am I telling this story? One of the dreams that I had, I woke up in the morning and I realized I had a dream of going to the bathroom and urinating blue. Now, that corresponds to a bizarre, unusual, memorable dream. I can't think of the psychological word. Preternaturally clear, the psychologists like to say. The dream that has something really unusual about it. So I woke up and I thought, now that's really unusual, and that's not something I'm worried about. And the very first thing that I read, and that did not happen, but the very first thing that I read on the New York Times on my screen is that the water is so contaminated in Cairo that it comes out of the faucet bright blue. So I would say that my dream, my hypnopompic dream, the dream on awakening, was caused by what I read on the screen an hour later. So what we say is that the future can affect the past. I had another similar dream like that, same kind of thing, where I dreamt that an electric train was running around the top of my living room. I have a cathedral ceiling in the living room, and I had an electric train running around the lower edge of the ceiling. I thought it was very cool. Where the hell did that come from? And the story in the New York Times that morning was about the elevator in Chicago, which runs around the loop, and I'd just written about that in my book. The first place that I learned magic from was at a magic store in the loop. I grew up, I knew all about the elevator in Chicago. So I would say that the story about the elevator in Chicago with the pictures of the elevator trains in the morning caused me to have a dream at an earlier time. So we say that the future evidently can affect the past. We don't think the future can change the past. However, if you have managed to get off of this material plane, that I'm a physicist, I can't help myself, but I believe in cause and effect. I think that everything that you do has a cause. But if you are able to make use of this psychically derived information, then you're able to move yourself off of the ordinary plane. I want to avoid getting into what some of us believe is that we live in a complex space-time, in a non-local space-time, where your awareness has mobility. The Buddhists knew this thousands of years ago. Every page of the Prajnaparamita says that separation is an illusion. And the yin-yang symbol, which I often have, the sign, the early Vedic symbol of no separation. What the early Hindus and Vedic teachers said, this would be 2,000 years before Christ, is that Atman equal Brahman. That is, your Atman, yourself, is one with all of physical and non-physical space-time. That is, your awareness is one with the whole aspect of space. You have no limitations to your awareness. So that 4,000 years ago it was already understood that you have non-local awareness. And the idea of non-local awareness is what allows you to have a precognitive dream of something that's going to happen in the future. We had a contract monitor who had worked with a very smart physicist from the CIA, has seen a lot of stuff, been through finding the general who was kidnapped in Italy and forecasting the failed atomic bomb test, and he'd seen it all. And he was in Detroit on business. and had a horrific dream, frightening dream, that his airplane was going to crash the next day. It was so realistic, and he has no fear of flying. This man has flown thousands of times. He's not worried about playing. Rough, tough CIA agent, not worried about getting on an airplane. But this was so realistic, and he had a new little girl, baby, that he loved, and wife and wife. CIA people do have wives and children. They're almost like regular people in many ways. So this adorable little girl, and he said, you know, I don't think I want to get on this airplane, but he didn't want to appear to be a sissy, so he drove his partner to the airport and just told him that something's come up, he had to stay in Detroit for one more day. He put his partner on the airplane, and as he was driving away, he got to see this DC-10 take off and crash at the end of the airport in Detroit, and just everybody got burned up in a fireball. But Ken did not have to be on the airplane to have the experience. He was able to make use of the experience in the dream to avoid being on the airplane. When I left SRI, I had the idea that I wanted to do something that people could really understand. It's more clear than spying on the Russians or publishing papers in Nature magazine or the Institute of Electrical Engineers. So the idea that it would be nice if we could make some money. And I know that there's a saying that God won't let you make money with your psychic abilities, but I did not believe that. And working with an experienced psychic from our program, we thought we would forecast silver commodity futures. Now, it would be nice if you could just close your eyes and read the numbers on the big board at the commodity exchange. But we know that you can't do that. So we had to find a kind of way of tricking psychic ability to give us the answer. And what we invented was something called associative remote viewing. It was really invented by Stephen Schwartz, who had worked with us. And this very imaginative philosopher got this idea that you could substitute interesting little objects for different states that you were trying to forecast. So for example, each week the stockbroker would choose 4 interesting little objects. For example, in one week he might say, if silver goes up a lot, I'll show you a champagne bottle. If it goes up a little, I'll show you my coffee mug. If it goes down a little, I'll show you the book, and if it goes down a lot, I'll show you my leftover pancake. And that's going to happen next Friday. Monday morning, he chooses these 4 objects. And the viewer, who I'm again the interviewer, says, I spent 30 years as an interviewer, so that's how I became experienced in teaching this. I would ask my viewer, here we are Monday, on Friday I'm going to put something in your hand. Tell me what you experience now with regard to what I'm going to give you Friday. I'm going to put it right into your hand. What are you experiencing? How does it feel? What's the shape? And I would never say, what is it? Because that kind of naming and grasping is the enemy of psychic functioning. You can never, the analysis and imagination and naming is what kills it. You never ask your viewer, what is it? You ask, how does it feel? What shape do you see? What colors come to view? And my psychic might have said to me something like, this is a unusual object. It's kind of round and floppy. It has a bad smell. I don't know what the thing is. It's round and floppy and kind of disgusting. I said, well, thank you very much. It's a very, very good description. I call the broker and say, I got a very interesting description for you. He said, my psychic said it's round and floppy and has a bad smell and kind of disgusting. Do you have anything like that? He said, well, that's a good description of my leftover pancake. So based on that description of the pancake, we would sell $10,000 worth of silver into the market. This is when the Hunt brothers were buying. We made most of our money selling. And at the end of the week, when silver went down, we would show the viewer the pancake. So this had nothing to do with fundamentals. We were buying and selling silver by whether the psychic saw a tuna fish sandwich or a light bulb. So we made a lot of money forecasting silver. The following year we were not successful. Different people have different ideas of why we failed the following year. One of the things, the fact, is that the broker was so enthusiastic, he wanted us to do it twice a week instead of once a week, which meant that the viewer could not get feedback before he had to do the next trial. So before he got closure on trial 1, he had to do trial 2, and we think that that's a bad idea. We also, I must say, lost our spiritual focus. We were interested to know, are we going to corner the silver market? Are we going to make so many hundreds of millions of dollars that we will pull the market? So in the beginning it was for science. The second go-round was not for science. However, 15 years later, 1995 or later, 1998, I wrote another book called Miracles of the Mind with a spiritual healer named Jane Catra. And our publisher said, as long as you're telling people how to be psychic, don't you think that the two of you should do something indicating that you actually have some idea of what you're talking about? I said, okay, we'll replicate the silver experiment. So Jane and I were the forecasters, the psychics, and two other people, two mathematicians who are our friends, ran the program. And in order to go forward with a forecast, Jane and I would have to each agree on our individual targets. So if I said I see the up target, she saw the down target, it would be a pass. And we did 18 targets and 18 trials, and 6 were passes. Of the 12 trials that went forward into the market, 11 were successful. So 2 mild-mannered science types were able to do the same kind of associated remote viewing and be correct 11 out of 12 times. So that makes me believe that this is probably quite doable by any kind of serious-minded person who is interested in going forward and doing applied remote viewing. I think this can be done. So my experience comes from sitting in the dark in the lab, noticing that my awareness is not tied strongly to my body. It's clear that my awareness is stimulated by my senses, but in remote viewing, I have this non-local awareness where the perception and the experience that I'm getting has nothing to do with my body. I can see into the distance, see into the future, and the teaching that comes from that is, although we reside as bodies, and Buddhists are very clear that bodies are hard to come by, you're very fortunate to have one, you should take good care of it, just don't think that's who you are. And we are able to quiet our minds and experience the distance, experiencing in the distance and in the future, and make use of those in our lives. By going through the complex space-time and finding a path that has no distance.